All right, I've got 7:05, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Other folks may still join us, and it's fine for them to trickle in. My name is Kirk Wilbur. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs at the California Cattlemen's Association. And I want to thank you all for joining us for this morning's workshop on reducing wildfire risk and preparing for the threat of wildfire. This is the second in a series of workshops on wildfire risk management, which is made possible through a grant from the Western Extension Risk Management Education Center, as well as USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. Over the next 6 months or so, CCA will be hosting a few more of these workshops on wildfire-related issues. California's fire season is already well underway, as most of you are aware. CAL FIRE already reports 2,615 incidents so far in 2021. With what are likely to be the worst months of the fire season ahead of us, now is a good time to overview some considerations that you all should have in mind in advance of that fire season, such as public safety power shutoffs, defensible space, and insurance considerations. Before we get started this morning, I want to recognize Lisa Brendlin, CCA's Director of Finance, who planned and organized today's event, including lining up our wonderful panel of speakers. I also want to recognize CCA's Director of Communications, Katie Roberti, for her efforts in advertising this workshop to you all and arranging for us to convene this morning via Zoom. We are joined today by Rich Noonan and Mike Wilson, two public safety experts from Pacific Gas and Electric, who will be presenting on the topic of public safety power shutoffs. I believe we also have Justin Witt with PG&E with us. We are also joined by Randy Harris, a battalion chief and fire marshal with the city of Paso Robles, who will give us some great information on maintaining defensible space. Finally, we'll hear from Kevin Hoppen, the Vice President of Wraith, Scarlett, and Randolph, who will give us some information on insurance considerations relating to wildfire and fire suppression and prevention activities. Gentlemen, I want to thank you all for making yourselves available to us so bright and early this morning for this Zoom, and I'm looking forward to hearing you speak on these important topics. We're going to save any questions for our speakers until the end of their respective presentations. If you're joining us from your computer this morning, the best way to ask a question will simply be to click the chat feature at the bottom of the Zoom window and to type in and submit your question. You can do that at any time during a presentation, and I will ask those questions of our speakers at the end of their presentations. Additionally, during a Q&A period, if you want to ask a question verbally, you can raise your hand in Zoom by clicking the participants panel and then selecting the raise hand option. When you do that, Katie will unmute you to ask your question of our speaker. Finally, if you have joined us via your phone today, you can raise your hand to ask a question by pressing *9, and you may unmute yourself to ask that question by pressing *6. I will repeat those instructions frequently throughout this morning's workshop. One last note before we get started with our presentations. I know you've heard me speak for long enough here. Later today or early tomorrow, you should all receive a follow-up email from me. That'll be from kirk@calcattleman.org. That email will include a link to a video of today's workshop and copies of some of the PowerPoint presentations given today. So you don't have to worry about taking notes or whether you missed something during the presentation. All of that information will be made available to you later on. That email will also include a link to a brief survey about today's workshop. That survey will take a couple of minutes, and if you could please complete it, that will assist us at the California Cattlemen's Association in meeting our reporting goals or our reporting obligations for this grant, and will also improve our delivery of our future workshops under this grant program. Now, without further ado, I will open the floor to our first group of presenters, which are Rich Noonan and Mike Wilson from PG&E. Katie, if you can get them set up, and gentlemen, you can take it from here.
All right. Good morning, Kirk and Katie. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, you sound great.
All right. So yeah, I'll get us started, and then I'll let Rich introduce himself. My name is Mike Wilson. Just came over to PG&E this last year, year ago, and came from 32 years of CAL FIRE before that. So most of my background, and same with Rich, is in public safety realm, working all over California for CAL FIRE. We come on as a public safety specialist. I'm assigned to Napa County, and basically a liaison between all things wildfire and gas emergencies, between PG&E and fire law and the local OES, Offices of Emergency Services. Rich, you want to go ahead and say hello, and then I'll get started with the first few slides.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Thank you for your time and this opportunity to engage with you. I'm Rich Noonan, the Senior Public Safety Specialist with PG&E. I have a similar background to Mike's, 32 years total fire service. Mike and I came on at the same time last year in June. And I'm coming to you this morning from Mendocino County. Wasn't born here, but been here since 1972, and have a bit of a ranching background as well. So we look forward to doing the presentation and answering any questions that any of you might have.
Yeah, it's a good point. I didn't grow up on a ranch, but was surrounded by a 30,000 acre ranch up in southern Humboldt County on the Sadley Ranch. And then, where I live is always within the PSPS area. And, I'm used to living off a well and being more self-sufficient like that. So we do bring a little bit of perspective. And so we'll go ahead and get started with the next slide. So PG&E always likes to start off with a little minute of safety to get their meetings going. So run through a few safety items. Always want to make sure you got two routes of exit, no matter where you're at. Obviously, we're in earthquake country, so duck, cover, and hold if we get something shaken. Go ahead and, since a lot of people these days are working remotely, we always remind folks that if you're at home alone and such, and you got an emergency coming up, medical or something, we can be of help. Go ahead and speak up, or throw it in the chat if you can't speak up, and we'll let us know where you're at, and we'll try to help get help to you. And then obviously our remaining safety protocols for COVID. We made it this far, so we're going to keep up with that. So next slide. So this background map on the left is the California Public Utilities Commission high fire threat areas. It was a map that was built a couple years back, showing basically tier 2 and tier 3. You'll see in the lower left hand, elevated and extreme fire risk areas throughout California. So any public utility or private utility doing providing electricity in these areas does have to adhere to the different levels of risk and build their system and maintain it accordingly in those higher risk levels. You can see that a large portion of that black outlined area is the PG&E territory, and other than the Central Valley, there is a large amount of high fire threat risk. We mostly look at it the same, whether it's tier 2 or tier 3, and so that's just to give you an idea of where it lays, and then with some other some information on the size of the amount of customers served, overhead line miles, 81,000 total, but 25 are in those, about a third of them in the high fire risk areas. And then transmission lines, there's a large chunk of them running through the higher fire threat areas. And this map can be found there at the bottom. You'll see the CPUC website /fire threat maps. And you can drill down pretty good into, down to the local level. It's a good map to look at. And then we have, the priorities here are to reduce wildfire potential, and we're always looking to do that through a good asset inspection program, enhanced vegetation management, which is you have your annual compliance vegetation management that we'll go into a bit further, but the enhanced veg management are priority areas where we're cutting limbs off from above the lines instead of just around them, and removing trees as needed. System hardening is something we'll talk about. Basically, just like the gentleman from Paso Robles will talk about defensible space and home hardening. Enhanced veg management would be the defensible space, and system hardening will be some other areas that we'll talk about: stronger poles, covered wires, and such. And then targeted device replacement, and then of course PSPS, which we'll focus on today. Improve situational awareness. Those are things like better weather, more weather stations, a good meteorology program, satellite detection, and then reducing the impacts of PSPS events, looking at focusing on those highest risk areas in those items. We'll talk a little bit too about some of the microgrids that we're working on as well. Go to the next slide. So this one, basically, here, let me slide down here. Things that are new in 2021, we've increased the amount of system hardening for circuit miles. We've got 300 new weather stations, 135 new fired cameras. Those are high definition cameras that can be found at alertwildfire.org. That's open. It's an open source website, really good if you haven't checked that out, or keep an eye out on remote country that you may have or manage. And all those cameras are made available to the fire dispatch centers to tilt, pan, and zoom, so they can take control and remotely watch any new fire starts. We also obviously are watching those closely. And then, of course, your enhanced veg management, covering 1,800 miles of high risk areas. So that's, and then supporting our customers and communities. We'll go into this, but multiple different languages. We got a battery program. We do a lot, try to do a lot to reduce and watch out for the ADA accessible community. And then meal replacement through Meals on Wheels. These are things that we're trying to support and ease the impact during PSPS. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So in particular, the system hardening is really a key component to making the grid more resilient to fire in general, not just ignition resistant to not spark unwanted fires, but also third-party fires that are coming through. The work we're doing to put in stronger poles, covered conductor, covered wires for distribution lines. Distribution is everything that's below 60 kV. So those are your distribution lines coming off the higher transmission lines. Transmission lines above 60 kV are not able to be covered, but they always normally have a better corridor for veg management. So distribution hardening, that's like I said, a key critical part of our work, and that they're just full throttle and trying to assess the highest risk areas and get the work done there first, and then branching out from there. The cross arms are non-wood, composite or aluminum, and higher, stronger, better poles. And we're also going to some pre-wrapped poles that are actually pretty fire resistant and have tested out pretty well. And then obviously, when unfortunately we have fire season like last year, they'll when they're doing a rebuild, they'll be committed to rebuilding into this hardened state instead of putting it back the way it was. And also that note in the middle says it really has started to help even during the winter time for less outages. And then eventually, as it becomes more trusted and in place, it will help to reduce the areas of public safety power shutoffs. Next slide. This slide shows basically the veg management between routine maintenance and our enhanced veg management. So as you can see on the left there, the minimum clearance for the normal distribution lines is 4 feet out in a cylindrical shape, meaning you can have branches above, the cylinder comes out to 12 feet as a suggested amount of clearance. Basically, that's to make sure that throughout the growing season, throughout the year, you don't have to go back in and keep trimming back to that 4 foot. So then on the right, you have the 4 and 12 cylinders, but then also we're trying to take it from line to sky, basically, and get rid of those overhanging branches. Because as you know, on bare wire, you get a branch that blows in or falls in. It might not take down the wire, but if it cross phases between 2 lines, that's what gives your arcs and sparks and can cause a fire in the grass below. Again, with the covered conductor, covered wire, that does really help for that cross phase reduction. And you can see some of the numbers, 4,300 miles completed for enhanced veg management. And this year, we're looking to hit 1,800 more miles. One thing I can say here is that, a lot of our veg management folks, they'll run into, homeowners who just don't want them on their property or don't want the trees cut. And, that's a tough thing because, there's a right to be there to maintain a safe line, but when we're going beyond, we work it out with the homeowners. So any help or, support in that area is just better for all of us to educate folks on the importance. Is no different than, defensible space or home hardening around homes. If your neighbor does it, then it's going to help you. So same with allowing PG&E vegetation crews to handle the tree risks makes it better for all of us and our neighbors. Next slide. New technologies. This is there's a few of them. This rapid earth fault current limiter is one that's actually was proven out over the last few years real well in Australia. Basically, it takes if there's a fault, line drops to the ground, or branch touching the lines, it'll sense it in a microsecond and reduce that power, not completely eliminate it, but reduce it down to where it's such a low voltage that it will not cause arcs and sparks. So in theory, that's the way it works. The very first REFCOL, rapid earth fault current limiter system that was put in place in North America is actually here in Napa County around Calistoga area. And it's tested out real well so far. So that's in full swing. That's pretty exciting stuff to where you can just really eliminate the risk just through technology. Never want to completely depend on that, but that's an area that all utility companies are quickly moving towards. LiDAR, you'll see in the middle there, that light detection and ranging. It's a technology basically using light lasers, something like sonar, but with light, and it'll give you a real good look, and you can tell where the lines are as compared to where the vegetation is. You can also get the tops of trees versus the slope versus where the lines are. So that's something that's being used a lot now to add intel to where our the vegetation hazards are. They've used it in the transmission system for quite a few years. Now it's expanded heavily into the distribution system. And then fire spread and modeling. That is there's a company called Technosova that seems to be kind of emerged as the international leader in fire spread modeling. CAL FIRE has a large contract with them, as well as all the other large utility companies at least in California. And it just is a good method to basically prioritize where the highest risk fire prone areas are, of where there'll be the most consequence. And that's something we've also really sunk our teeth into within this last year. And I believe at this point, I'll kick it over to Rich, if you want to go to the next slide. Yeah, we're talking about more in-depth PSPS stuff here. So take it away, Rich.
All right, thanks, Mike. So public safety power shutoffs, what are they and why are they necessary? Well, it's for the safety of our customers and communities. Public safety power shutoff continues to be a necessary tool in our wildfire safety toolkit. That's done as a last resort. High winds can cause tree branches and debris to contact energized electric lines, which can damage our equipment, and if they end up arcing and sparking or on the ground, they can cause an ignition of a fire. As a result, we may need to turn power off during severe weather conditions for public safety. I really want to emphasize here that these events are always weather driven, and they're only called upon and executed when extreme weather and wildfire risk are present. So a lot of you have probably had an experience where there was a public safety power shut off and you had no winds locally. And you kind of wondered why is this being done? Well, electricity a lot of times travels many miles, sometimes hundreds, can even be more than that, from the generation source on the transmission side of things to get to our homes and businesses. And there may not be local winds that are affecting the distribution circuits. However, if the winds are affecting the transmission side of things, without transmission, without a source, we have no distribution. So sometimes that can be an area of confusion. Hey, why is my power off? There's no wind. But it's a transmission level impact that caused the trigger points to be met and the public safety power shut off done. And we move on here to the next slide. What kind of conditions? I think I messed up there. Let's go back one. There we go. What kind of conditions lead to a public safety power shutoff event? When deciding if power must be shut off for the safety of customers and our communities, we review a combination of factors. As each weather situation is unique, we carefully analyze the following factors. Low humidity levels. This is one of the trigger points. Generally 30% and below. Forecast of high winds, particularly sustained winds above 20 miles an hour with wind gusts above 30 to 40 miles an hour. The condition of dry material on the ground and low fuel moisture content of live vegetation. A red flag warning declared by the National Weather Service. And then our real-time ground observations from the weather stations that Mike was talking about before. And we have a hazard awareness warning center that monitors those weather stations, as well as a large and sophisticated meteorology department of our own that we use to monitor the weather. And then crews will go out also across the service territory and ground truth the weather data that's being sent into the hazard awareness warning center. This year, our decision-making process is evolving to also account for the presence of trees that are tall enough to strike power lines when determining if a PSPS is necessary. Every wildfire season is different, and the ongoing drought and the conditions that are produced from the drought will determine the number of times we need to shut off power. Again, it's all driven by safety. The this set of criteria is the first step, which may lead to further analysis from our meteorology team to decide if a public safety power shutoff is necessary. And go to the next slide, please. For tree overstrike. So what I was just talking about there with factoring in the limbs or trees that might impact our distribution lines, it only factors in on distribution, not transmission. Tree overstrike exposure and potential PSPS decision making. Again, all driven by safety, and safety of our customers and communities is absolutely the most important responsibility that we have. Each year we've made improvements to the public safety power shutoff program, and the same is true for this year. You might have heard in the media, it's been covered fairly heavily, about the additional criteria that we've developed for public safety power shutoff. Recently, federal court issued an order that recommended, but it didn't require, that we account for trees that are tall enough to strike power lines when deciding whether to turn off power for safety. So the thought might be, I know up where I live in Mendocino County, there's trees everywhere. And a lot of them are conifer types, and they're quite tall, and they can reach the power lines should something happen. But I want to stress here that no one factor drives the decision to do a public safety power shutoff. All of those other criteria have to be met as far as the winds and wind gusts, dry material, low humidities, red flag warning. If all of those things meet the criteria, then the tree overstrike potential is added in as an additional precaution, if you will. So we have proposed adding that criteria to the program, and it's being evaluated right now, just exactly how that piece of the puzzle is going to fit in. So how will customers be notified when there's going to be a PSPS? We'll always do our best to share what we know about the weather and our equipment as soon as we can. Weather changes really fast, as I know you're all aware. And sometimes the weather modeling, it can be kind of uncertain. We have to err on the side of caution and prepare for maybe the necessity of having to de-energize. You can expect to receive notifications typically 48 hours before power is shut off when PG&E goes into what we call a watch mode for public safety power shut off if weather conditions are looking like we may need to go in that direction. So one day before de-energizing, still in watch mode, and then typically within 12 hours we're in what is called the warning mode, and there'll be notifications once a day during the public safety power shutoff event, and notifications when we begin to patrol, get the all clear, which means that it's safe to re-energize areas, and as we restore power. So we continue to provide updates through automated calls, texts, and email, and you'll also get a lot of that from the media as well. We encourage you to review the contact information that PG&E has on file for you by visiting pge.com/mywildfirealerts. Now this year we've launched a new program that's called Address Alerts, and this particular program is for people that don't have a PG&E account, but they might be a PG&E customer. And how that works is if you have a local utility, like there's one here in Mendocino County, Ukiah City Electric, they're a transmission level customer for PG&E. So Their power in the Ukiah Valley is generated and delivered by PG&E on the transmission side of things, but the substation out into where the customers are is all Ukiah City. So in the past, and that condition exists in other areas around the state as well. So with this new program, you can put your address in and it will let you know whether it's looking like or likely that in that 48 to 24 to 12 hour period, you might be subject to a public safety power shutoff. That information wasn't available before because typically the transmission level impacts don't come in until the 24 to 12 hour time frame. We also provide updates at our regular website, pge.com, and to local news and radio outlets and social media as well, which can be seen on this slide. So next slide, please. So customer support programs, what are we doing to help support people when the PSPS events occur? We've been partnering with community-based organizations, working side by side with community-based organizations to provide support and resources throughout public safety power shutoff events, expanding language offerings, information regarding the PSPS events is in 16 languages in addition to English, increasing meal replacement options, collaborating with local food banks and Meals on Wheels to provide food replacement packages to cover every county that's likely to be impacted during public safety power shutoff, and collaborating with the Disability Disaster Access and Resources Program to enable qualifying customers who use electrical medical devices to access backup portable batteries through a grant, lease-to-own options, or financial loan applications. That would be oxygen machines, CPAPs, things of that nature. Additional assistance through this program includes access to transportation resources, hotel vouchers, and food stipends following public safety power shutoff event in the event that you have food spoilage. We also have a portable battery program where we provide batteries to low-income medical baseline customers that have those critical medical needs with electricity-powered devices of different kinds. And then generator rebate program. Now, that might be something that some of you maybe have looked into already, but a lot of folks are probably on wells or have ag wells, agricultural wells, and when you lose power, you're not able to water your livestock, and domestic water is a challenge as well. So we're offering customers that are dependent on well water and live in high fire threat areas rebates for purchasing a qualified portable power generator. And I think we can go on to the next slide, please. So specifically on the battery program, we provide backup portable batteries in various sizes intended to charge medical devices for income-eligible qualified customers who live in high fire threat districts, and they're enrolled in the medical baseline program through pge.com. This is really easy to do. You just go on pge.com and put in some basic information, and it gets on, you get put on for medical baseline. This year we're providing an additional 5,000 batteries, and that's above and beyond the 6,500 batteries that we provided last year, for a total of 11,500 as part of that program, which is partially done in conjunction with the California Foundation for Independent Living Centers and Disability Disaster Access and Resources Program. We conduct this program in coordination with a number of community-based organizations. And the batteries would be delivered to medical baseline customers at the beginning of public safety power shutoff season and retrieved in December for storage and maintenance. Now, generator rebate program is, as I said, when you're on well water or an ag well for livestock, it's a single rebate for purchasing a qualified portable generator. The goal of that program is to expand and provide a suite of product offerings to customers that are impacted by PSPS. And let's go on to the next slide here. I think the next slide's got the, there we go. That's my fault for not having you advance that. Thank you. So, single rebate for purchasing the qualified portable power generator, and program offers a $300 rebate for eligible customers, and then a $500 rebate for customers that are participants in the CARE or FARA programs, which is a low-income program. To be eligible for the backup generator rebate program, you must have an active electric PG&E account, reside in Tier 2 or Tier 3, so moderate to high risk fire threat area, as determined by the CPUC map that we looked at earlier during Mike's presentation. And you rely on well water either for domestic or premise water needs. Next slide, please. So Safety Action Center. Our Safety Action Center website contains helpful information about what customers can do to keep their family, home, and business safe during an emergency. Resources on the website include tips on how to create an emergency plan, emergency preparedness guides and videos, links to the statewide Power of Being Prepared campaign, and other resources. This content is social media friendly to encourage sharing and is available in English, Spanish, and Chinese. You can learn more about that program at safetyactioncenter.pge.com. And next slide, please. Can we advance to the next slide, please? More information and tools to prepare. We also have a variety of wildfire preparedness tools available to our customers online, including the public safety power shutoff address alerts that I discussed earlier, information and resources that are available in more than 250 languages, our weather and public safety power shutoff forecasting page, preparedness tools and activities for kids, Safety Action Center, and then the Backup Power webpage. All these websites and more information about our community wildfire safety program and all of PG&E's wildfire safety efforts can be found at www.pge.com/wildfire safety. So next slide here, I think we're about to wrap this up and go into a question and answer period here shortly. Thank you very much. Anybody that has questions that come up once we're done, if you don't think about it until later, go ahead and give us a call at the number that's on the screen there, the 1-866-743-6589, or email us at wildfiresafety@pge.com. You can also visit the dedicated website, pge.com/wildfire safety, for more information about the wildfire safety alerts and tips to help prepare for severe weather and possible power outages. And that's year round. That can be wintertime impacts from weather as well.
Thank you, Rich and Mike, and thank you, Justin. I know you were operating the PowerPoint there. Folks, we will open it up to questions for Mike and Rich. Again, to ask a question, you can either type it by clicking chat at the bottom of your Zoom window. You can also raise your hand at the bottom of your Zoom window, and Katie will unmute you to ask your question. If you are joining us on the phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand and *6 to unmute. We did have one question in the chat. I know it's already been answered to some extent, but I wanted to flag it for folks who may not be following the chat. Carrie had asked, we are well dependent in Amador County. How do we find out if we qualify for that rebate you were discussing? I know, Rich, that you then went on to discuss how folks can qualify, and Mike had provided the link. If you're curious how you can qualify for those programs, you can go to pge.com/backuppower. Carrie, hopefully the presentation answered your question, and that link further answers your question. But I welcome your follow-up question if you have one, and anyone else, if you have questions of Mike or Rich, go ahead and raise your hand now.
Hey, and this is Rich again. One thing that I wanted to make sure that I covered that I missed, it's only going to take a minute, is the types of outages. And the reason that I bring this up is last month, we had an early morning outage, a transmission level outage here in Mendocino County, occurred at about 4:45 a.m. And that outage was due to a failure in the transmission system, and it affected a couple of different communities, southern Humboldt and northern Mendocino County. The media in the area figured that it was a public safety power shutoff, and they put it out that way, and that was not the case. So I wanted to talk real quick about the types of outages. You know, we can experience planned or unplanned power outages for different safety reasons. Planned work has to do with equipment that's been scheduled to be replaced or changed out. Rotating outages when the state's grid operator, the California Independent System Operator, or CAISO as it's commonly called, determines there's not enough energy to supply customer demand. This generally happens during extreme heat events when a lot of AC units are running, and that is an outage that the independent system operator does, and PG&E has no control over that. Emergency outages when lines are de-energized so that crews can safely repair damage to electrical equipment that's caused by heat, lightning, or any other kind of damage. Active wildfires, during which CAL FIRE or the agency having jurisdiction may request that we shut off the power in that area for public safety or for the safety of first responders. Even if the lines aren't down, if the smoke has enough particulate matter in it, it can conduct electricity and can have what's called a flash arc, and people on the ground can be injured by that. So that's why they ask us to do that. And then, you have the public safety power shutoffs that I've been discussing when the power shut off for public safety during severe weather events such as strong winds, low humidity, and dry vegetation. So I would encourage folks that if you have an outage and you're hearing that, it might be a PSPS, right? And you didn't hear anything leading up to it, there was no notice, it just occurred, to go on our website and look for the information. Sometimes we're all human beings and we make mistakes, and sometimes we make assumptions that aren't correct. And unfortunately, that stuff gets reported out to the public. So if you ever have any questions about what we're doing and why, you can always go onto our website. That information will be there.
Thanks for that additional information, Rich. Katie, do we have any raised hands?
I don't see any.
All right. Well, thanks again to Mike Wilson, Rich, and Justin. Appreciate that presentation. If you guys want to stick around till the end, there may be additional questions at the end of today's workshop. But seeing no raised hands at the moment, I'd like to turn it over to Randy Harris, who is a battalion chief and fire marshal with the city of Paso Robles, who is going to discuss defensible space with us. Thanks for joining us this morning, Randy, and I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, good morning, Kirk. Thanks for having me. What I'd like to do is start by sharing my screen, so bear with me just 1 minute, please. Did that display okay for everybody?
I'm not seeing it right now, Randy.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Oh, there it is.
Perfect.
Thank you.
So I'm Randy Harris. I'm a battalion chief and the fire marshal for the city of Paso Robles. For those of you that aren't aware, Paso Robles is on the central coast of California, kind of right in the middle between LA and the San Francisco area. One of the beautiful things of our area is that it is fairly rural. However, we do have very good access both northbound to the Bay Area and then also southbound to the whole LA basin. And I share that with you because California has a great mutual and automatic aid system. But on our mutual aid system, we really travel to all parts of the state to participate in some of these larger wildfires. And when I was asked to speak today about defensible space, it really kind of dawned on me that defensible space and home hardening has really changed since the 2017 wildfires. In 2017, for those of you that remember, that was the year that it kicked off in Santa Rosa. And what we saw in Santa Rosa was basically the complete devastation of typical neighborhoods with, front lawns and curbs and gutters. And, it even burned through shopping centers and hospitals and things that we just never really imagined being a hazard for a wildfire. The Santa Rosa area, yes, is surrounded by some rugged country and the beautiful Napa Valley area with multiple vineyards. But we really never thought that a wildfire could get into, a city environment like that and burn through neighborhood after neighborhood. And luckily, the nation stepped up, not just from the Insurance Institute, who's done a ton of research since the 2017 wildfires, but also UC, the UC Conservative, in particular, the UC Cooperative. There's a doctor there, Vlakovic, and they've just done a ton of research and actually looked at all of these fires. And so in 2017, we had the Tubbs, and then later that year, we had the Thomas fire, which is down in Ventura, yet another major fire. Then, the next year, we had not only the Camp Fire, but also the Woolsey fire down in the LA basin. And then came back around in Santa Rosa again, had another major fire, the Kincaid fire. And last year in 2020, we had a lightning complex that kind of ripped through the state and almost all of Northern California was on fire. So what are we seeing? What's different with all these? In the Insurance Institute and these scientists have really done a good job in trying to figure out what it takes to make your property resistant to fire spread. So what I'm going to do is start with some of the basics. We're going to talk about fire spread. We're going to talk about defensible space, and then we're going to kind of roll into home hardening and what really makes the difference. So first, it's important to know how wildland fires spread. And this is the $1 million question, because if we could eliminate all of these, we really wouldn't have a problem. But things are changing. California's changing, our environment's changing. So when you look at fire spread, most of us think of direct flame contact. So when you think of defensible space, you're picturing a fire front moving and slowly burning towards your home, or even rapidly burning towards your home, but you're picturing kind of the main body of fire coming towards your structure. That would be direct flame contact, where you have continuous fuels all the way to your structure. And most of our historical defensible space kind of public education mottos, ordinances, and laws have been really focused on that direct flame contact. Let's reduce the fuels around our structures. That's going to help, slow the fire spread. And that's very true. That's only one of the methods of fuel reduction there. So the other one is embers, and that's really what's been focused on probably really since 2017, and most of the fire spreads of these major campaign fires have been spread through embers, and we'll talk about that quite a bit in depth coming up. And then the other is radiant heat. And so if you picture that typical neighborhood where houses are separated, 10, 15 feet apart, once your neighbor's house is on fire, unless someone is there to, cool your structure and start to control that fire almost immediately, the radiant heat alone, the heat waves, invisible heat waves, kind of like when you're sitting around a campfire and you're feeling that heat, that's the radiant heat from it. So when you have a large fire next to a home, whether it's caused from another home or from the brush, that radiant heat is going to actively warm the organic material, wood of your house, whatever it might be. And then slow but sure, that's going to make windows fail. That's going to, cause that siding to heat up, and pretty soon the fire is going to spread to that structure. So those are very, basic concepts, but important for us to kind of start before we go to the next subject matter. So the next subject is really, what does it take to spread and intensify wildland fires? So wildland fires in particular, there's basically fuel, weather, and topography. And we're going to start with fuel. So what fuel looks like isn't what everyone thinks about. So the first bullet point here, vegetation, that's what most of us think about. That's what most of our defensible space has been modeled after. Let's eliminate the large trees, large, brush and stuff around our homes. Let's take our grasses, especially seasonal grasses, down to less than 4 inches. Let's get some typical defensible space around our structures. And most of us have focused on vegetation over the years. But what we really haven't thought about is, what else is combustible around our home? Well, when we look at it, mulch, they've done a ton of testing with different flammability. So it's not just like a gorilla hair type mulch that's very receptive to embers and organic materials, but basically it's even larger pieces of bark, anything that's combustible at all around our house is fuel and receptive to embers. And we're going to get into embers a lot more. Additionally, when you look at wood storage, decks, anything, tarps, anything that is ready to combust. So if you're going to, put an active flame to it like a lighter, that's what you're, to defend against for ember casting. And what ember casting is, and I have a better picture here coming up, so I don't want to get into it too much, but ember casting is chunks of basically like a charcoal that are flying through the air, spreading these little spot fires. And so when you think about fuel, just think about what's around your house, and we're going to get into that a little more. So next, let's talk about weather. So what's been the big difference in our fires since the 2017 Tubbs fire? Almost all these fires have had significant wind events. Most of the things that PG&E is hardening against, and they had a great intro to this subject matter, obviously, but they're trying to keep their lines from being windblown. And usually it's a large wind event that causes problems, not only with power lines, but also with other things, once a fire gets started, with the rate of the spread. And so this picture is actually from the Thomas Fire. The Thomas Fire, if you remember, started outside the city of Ventura in an area around Santa Paula, and it was quickly wind driven all the way to the coast. And the strong Santa Ana wind event basically had this fire going for about 3 to 4 weeks, and it burned up towards the area north, towards the area of Santa Barbara. So the weather events, what you have to really defend your property against is also weather. So let's talk a little more on the next one that really intensifies fire behavior, and that's topography. Now, Can we do much with topography? Can we change the topography of our land? Probably not. But the one reason that you really want to think about this is maybe for that new homeowner or that person rebuilding a house, and that is wind intensifies as it burns kind of upslope in a saddle like this. And so if you have the chance to actually pick where you're going to put your structure, you don't want to put a structure at the top of a saddle like this or a draw, because that is going to have an intensified, almost like a chimney effect that you really, it's really hard to create any sort of real defensible space and home hardening when you're getting the brunt of the fire through a chimney and increased winds. So fuel, weather, and topography, those are the three things that really intensify a fire. Bear with me while I change one slide here. So now let's talk about what we can do around our house to change those. So back to fuel. So fuel modification, at first it was really considered just that it was the most important thing you could do. Let's create defensible space. And really it was 2 zones originally. It was 0 to 30 feet. That was a very popular, and then 30 to 100. And if you can create 100 foot of defensible space, that's still what's in the public resource code. But thanks to the insurance institutes and University of California and all the great studies, a lot more has gone into it as far as what is truly causing homes to burn. And so when you look at this, and this graphic was taken from the Fire Safe Marin website, they've done a really good job in creating a really good tool. So those of you that want more information later, please visit firesafemarin.org. They have a great website with public education materials. There's numerous, including the San Luis Obispo Fire Safe Council, that do wonderful projects. The Fire Safe Council here in San Luis Obispo has been great at getting grants and helping local communities do fuel modification projects. I just wanted to give special acknowledgement to the Fire Safe Marin website, because they really do a great job on focusing on public education. And that's one thing that a lot of us don't have resources for, especially as small agencies such as my own. But when you get Fire Safe Marin, they actually have a lot of videos and a lot of good resources for you. So with that said, when you look at this particular slide, you'll notice there's 5 defensible space zones on here. Zone 0, and we're going to come back to it, is 0 to 5 feet. Zone 1 is that 5 to 30 feet, so more of that traditional zone. Zone 2, again, 30 to 100 feet. Zone 3 is a kind of added one here, and that's our access zone. So our access zone is adjacent to our driveways. We want to make sure that we can get in and get out. So if you have a bunch of vegetation next to, say, a long, narrow driveway, that's going to be really tough for resources to get in and help you, and also very tough for you to evacuate in a timely manner. So it's really important that you maintain that access. And then if you look at Zone 4, and picture the campfire up in Paradise, Zone 4 is a community zone. So that's an area outside your immediate property that you can't really control the direct results of, but you can participate in community meetings. You can participate in any sort of public clearing and fuel management projects that they make open to the public. So there's a lot that can be done community-wide, especially through a lot of dedication. But I'm going to bring it back to Zone 0. And Zone 0 is, your roof all the way down to the 5 feet surrounding your structure. So what does it look like? What does Zone 0 look like? Well, Zone 0, I like to say, is our battleground for ember resistance. And when it comes to that, little things truly matter. When you're looking at, and this slide is of a wind-driven fire again, fire does create its own wind, so it's very rare that we go to a fire that doesn't have some wind. But really, in the last 5 years, it's been kind of wind-driven fires that are these major campaign fires. This is a fast food restaurant. So most of us don't picture a fast food restaurant as wildfire prone. I mean, most fast food restaurants have a parking lot around them. They're made from, fairly modern construction materials. And it's just something that we don't normally consider susceptible. Well, even on the Tubbs fire, you know, they lost major shopping centers. You know, one of them was a large Kmart there. The fire jumped the 101 freeway, multiple lanes, and there was enough ember cast. So once again, chunks of burning material flying through the air to get other structures burning. But it's not just resistance from large chunks of embers that are burning, but you really have to think about the little things. And that's what we're going to go through and spend the next couple of minutes. So when you're home hardening or structure hardening, it's not just the roofs and the eaves. And I think we're probably all pressed, especially in California, to buy anything other than, you know, kind of a Class A fire resistive roof. I mean, you're not seeing a lot of wood shakes that are sold nowadays. So, you know, it's how roofs are maintained. So are you keeping leaf litter off roofs? Are you keeping the roof in good condition? In other words, there's not loose tiles, there's not loose, if it's a comp roof, there's not loose shingles that burning material can get underneath and ignite the OSB or sheeting below it. So really the condition and the maintenance of your roof, and most of these are maintenance items. But really, when you look at your eave, the type of screening that you have in your eave, so, you know, a lot of eaves used to be screened with 1/4-inch mesh or larger. Now, you know, it really takes something a little finer. So back to my motto here, little things matter. It takes an eave that is more of an 1/8 inch. And matter of fact, when you look at the California Building Code, Chapter 7A, which talks about, you know, construction in wildfire prone areas, they're even making eaves and vents that have luminescent paint. And so when a hot object hits that, it kind of gels over. So there's a lot of great new materials on the market now that can help you protect both your eaves and your vents. Gutters. So are we keeping combustible materials out of gutters? You know, in Paso Robles, we have a lot of beautiful oak trees. Oak trees, similar to pines and everything else, have, you know, a lot of leaves that do fall associated with them. Well, that is right over your gutter. Now, all of a sudden, you have a very light material next to your home that's in a gutter by nature, you know, as a captive device. So now you have this light flashing material in a captive protected device. I mean, that's just, it's a welcoming place for any sort of ember, rather it's a fine ember or a chunk style, you know, flying ember. That's the type of thing that's going to get burning. Now, imagine if you have plastic gutters. So now we have leaves burning to the plastic gutters right at the corner of your structure. So things like that matter. Take another look at your gutters, you know, see, are they metal gutters? Do we have any sort of screening over it? Is there any chance that debris can get in there? Little things truly do matter with that. We talked a little bit about vents, but when you're talking about vents, think of it holistically around your house, not just vents to, say, your attic space, but also vents to your basement, especially for that home that's maybe, you know, sitting at the top of a hill. A lot of us in California build homes sitting at the top of the hill for scenic reasons. But unfortunately, you know, one of the things that intensifies fires, we mentioned, is burning uphill. So take a look at your foundation vents, take a look at, you know, vents to, say, deck spaces, take a look at vents to sheds. If you have a shed that's proximal to your house, if that shed gets burning and it's adjacent to your house, you know, within 5-10 feet, now all of a sudden your home needs to withstand all that heat from the radiant fire of your shed burning. So your home and home hardening is only as good as the weakest point, and that might just be your shed and not your home. Chapter 7A, building construction, you know, applies to primary residences, but when people start adding miscellaneous buildings to their property, you are only as good as the weakest structure on your property, as far as, you know, they're all proximal to each other. And once again, that goes to your neighbor's property and working in your community. You know, if your neighbor doesn't have the same defensible area and home hardening, if their structure is close to yours, what's the results of that burning going to be? Then we're going to talk, the next one is windows and doors. And with windows and doors, I'm going to elaborate on it a little bit more, but That's more for those fine embers. So you have to think about that. And then the 0 to 5 combustibles, so landscape, storage, and debris. But let's change slides here and talk a lot more about windows, doors, and siding. So this is a fire I went on, the Woolsey Fire, November 2018. The one thing that I remember about the Woolsey Fire is it kicked off basically at the same time as the Camp Fire. So both Northern and Southern California were having, major fires at the same time. I went down as a strike team leader, so I had 5 engines with me, and we were put to work immediately that morning. And this is a neighborhood in Bell Canyon, and basically all the homes down the right side of the street were burning. This is the end of a cul-de-sac here. And then the fire eventually kind of wrapped its way around to our left. But we had multiple homes kind of perched at the top of a hill. And this is something, very common that you'll have kind of the roadways run at the top of the hill with homes, for scenic reasons, sitting on the top of these draws. So most of these homes were already too far involved for us to do much with. But the real purpose of this slide is if you look at this master bedroom door to the lower left here. So this particular house sat at the top of a draw, and I'm going to say it was well over a quarter, probably approaching a half mile away. And this particular house, sitting where it did, and you can see my vehicle there, and this split rail fence is straight down that draw. And what happened is a lot of the embers had, not only wind driven, but the embers had hit this saddle, like I mentioned, topography wise, and intensified burning the top. And so while this was a stucco home, 2-story stucco home in a, fairly populated neighborhood. In other words, they had homes every 20 or 30 feet. It wasn't a very, dense neighborhood like a lot of them, but this particular home, in between the door jamb, caught an ember. And you can see this little hole here and this little light that's burning through, and we're actually looking outside to the deck. So what typically happens on a home like this is the structure starts burning. We have multiple resources. We're concentrating on structure defense and trying to put out we call it perimeter control, trying to put out the fire where we can and limit its progression. But something like this from the outside appeared to be totally intact. The fire wasn't anywhere around it. It was, quite a distance away. And we definitely had our hands full, kind of down the street trying to do, save as many of the other homes that were actively burning as possible. But what was unique on this one is that once it burned through this door, and you can see the fire actually charred up on the interior wood framework or casework, it then set off a sprinkler head, a single sprinkler head inside this master bedroom. And you can see the condensation on the windows here had actually put this fire out. And so what I really thought was unique is this is a perfect example of the little things matter. So a small ember got into this casework. The casework then got burning inside the structure. And this would have definitely spread and been a working fire, a large fire burning the structure before it would have really spread to the outside. And we would have known that, this house a considerable distance away was actively burning. So the little things matter when it comes to windows, doors, and siding. You really need to provide sealing and caulking and maintain all of those door seals. So take a look at your door seals. It's not something we commonly think of in house maintenance. Sure, if there's a draft or something, we actively notice because we're cold. But take a look at your door seals. See if these little embers can get in there. See if there's wood or something that's going to combust if it does get in there. All right, let's talk a little more about 0 to 5 combustibles. So 0 to 5 combustibles is not only landscape, but storage, debris, decks, fences, anything at all that's combustible around our home. And the Insurance Institute, after 2017, as I mentioned, and also NFPA, set up a lot of great tests. And one of the tests they did is a video that is seen. This is a still photo from it. But this is 2 identical structures with different home hardening tactics. So in other words, you have more of a wood shake siding, which in California, granted, we don't see a ton of, but they also put some landscape on the corners. They also did your typical wood decking. And then instead of rock around the perimeter, like the structure on the right, they did mulch around the immediate vicinity of the house. So that's, you know, the first 5 feet. After that, they have these great ember casting and wind machines shown here in the lower left picture. They can create a ton of sparks, no different than what we saw from the Thomas fire. Actually, these are what I'll say finer sparks. But you'll notice that when a structure is subjected to that many sparks, you start to get little fires going. And that's how fires are spreading through California. Is we really have kind of that ember cast area that can go up to a mile. I mean, you'll get these large chunks of material. And what I mean by that, once again, is like a briquette, half a briquette of charcoal. You know, these are large things flying through the air, not necessarily just fine embers like shown in this test. But when you're looking at this test, you can see already that the gutter's on fire. So it had some receptive materials in it. Bushes on fire, especially when they're in the corner of a structure like that. You know, a lot of times we like to landscape, you know, directly close to our house because it does have an attractive look and it kind of breaks up that transition line from horizontal to vertical. But the problem there, especially on the corner of a house, is we already have seams in our siding. So all we have to do is kind of burn through that corner. And now behind that piece of trim, fire has a vertical place, you know, to run all the way up towards our attic space. So anytime, you know, especially on the corner of a house that you put additional combustible materials, it's really going to make the house that much more susceptible to burning. So one big watch out there. So let's talk about where to begin with all this. So first of all, you really want to begin with your fuel modifications. You know, take a look at the zones, but really concentrate on that 0 to 5. So once you get your fuels modified, once you get your seasonal grasses cut, once you do everything you can with a larger brush, let's start looking at our structure and how we can be ember resistant. Let's start looking at our roof edges, our vents. Let's start looking at the little things and how embers can ignite. Obviously in this steep slope picture here, if a fire is burning upslope, it's going to be really important to take a look at that deck and how it's going to catch embers. And then after that, you want to start looking at kind of the smaller things that do make a difference, like some of your windows and siding and maybe a deck that's not on a downward slope. But you want to take a look at all those things because all the small things really do make a difference. You know, new building homes, once again, depending on your jurisdiction and your fire severity area, may or may not need to be built to the Chapter 7A building code standards. But really, it's a matter of maintaining a home in good condition, you know, keeping all the seals working and limiting your combustibility, especially in that 0 to 5 zone. This picture here is from the car fire in Redding, California. You know, once again, another tragic fire. I took this picture just mostly because of the flag, and it was just such a devastated area. But this home, once again, was stucco brick. You can notice, you know, has good lawn all the way around it. You know, this structure had defensible space. But one thing that I noticed is they did have several palm trees around it. And this particular palm trees are very receptive to embers. You know, what we've seen, you know, especially from any of the Southern California fires, palm trees can get burning and then they share their own embers directly to the house. But with that, I'm open to any questions. Once again, I'm Randy Harris, Battalion Chief Fire Marshal. I can be reached at rharris@prcity.com. And I encourage everybody to take a look at the great website that Fire Safe Marin has put together. It's firesafemarin.org. So over to you, Kurt, for any questions.
Yeah, thank you for that presentation. Again, folks, if you have a question for Randy, you can type that in the chat box at the bottom of your Zoom window or raise your hand at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you are calling in, you can press *9 to raise your hand. And once Katie selects you to ask your question, *6 to unmute. Just a quick housekeeping question for you, Randy, and that is, if you're comfortable with us sharing it with the folks who are on the Zoom today, I will be sending out a follow-up email that includes some of the PowerPoints. Would you be willing to share your PowerPoint with Lisa, who has corresponded with you already?
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. And before we get to questions for you, there was a question in the chat, in the Q&A from John Schwabacker. This is actually Rich and Mike for you, if you're still available. John's question was, if you are in a remote area, is there PG&E equipment we should be more aware of or concerned about?
Yeah, hi, this is Rich. I would ask for a little bit more context in that. I mean, remote area and more equipment to be more aware of. I think that might be, is there, I'm guessing that it's about, is there equipment that's more susceptible, I guess, to wildfire risk? You know, not really. Anything you know, can be either that's out in remote areas. Our transmission lines typically run through remote areas where perhaps there is no human settlements around or residential structures or anything like that. But you know, they've got the transmission lines that are going through the area. Any energized equipment can, you know, under certain circumstances can cause sparks. So I don't think that there's any of their equipment that has more risk. I think that the risk is pretty stable across the board, and it you know, has mostly to do with if there's weather conditions and outage producing type winds in that area that could cause lines to slap together and sparks. Another thing that can cause outages and can cause ignitions as well are wildlife. Sometimes birds inadvertently will fly into to lines, or they'll land on a line, whether it's transmission or distribution, and then they get ready to take off, and they reach out with a wing and touch another line, and when that happens, they get electrocuted, and a lot of times they're on fire when they hit the ground, unfortunately. So yeah, I don't anything that has more risk. Just it's a good idea to, if you have you know, have the stuff in your area. Along with that, if you see something that doesn't look right, by all means, reach out to PG&E at 1-800-743-5000 and report that. That could be, you know, a tree that's leaning toward our lines, maybe a wind event's come through, or a snow event, something like that, and you know, you're out in a remote area that doesn't have a lot of you know, have a lot of folks driving by and whatnot, and you might see something that looks like it's within the strike zone, and you know, reach out and let us know so that whatever that issue is can be evaluated and mitigated before there's an issue. I hope that answered it.
Yeah, thank you for that response, Rich. Randy, back to you. We have a question in the Q&A from an anonymous attendee. That question is, when you are evacuating, what should you do with your extra vehicles? Should you leave extra vehicles in your garage? What about if you don't have a garage?
So yes, assuming that you have a garage, once again, with a good seal, that's probably the safest place for them, because most of the time people are concentrated on clearance around their house. So, you know, a garage with a good seal is a safe as any place for a vehicle to be stored on a property. Now, if you don't have a garage, you know, you're depending on your property and depending on the topography around it, I would either leave it kind of further away from maybe a slope burning up to the house and kind of leave it more shielded. But the last thing you want to do, for instance, once again, back to the car fire, there was a gentleman that had a Jeep without a top on it. And that Jeep unfortunately took some embers. The gentleman said the last thing he knew, his Jeep was on fire, and then that was parked under a carport that was attached to the house. And so just think about the topography around your house. Think about what areas, might be a little more vulnerable. And once again, try to make it more resistant to that.
Thank you for that response. Katie, do we have anyone with their hand raised?
No, I don't see anyone with their hand raised.
All right. Well, thank you again, Randy, for that presentation. If you are able to stick around for the end, we may have some questions for you at the end of today's workshop. Now I'd like to move on to our final presenter this morning. That is Kevin Hoppen, the Vice President of Wraith, Scarlett, and Randolph, who will be speaking to us about insurance considerations. So Kevin, I will turn it over to you. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kurt. Appreciate it. Thanks for being here. Bear with me 1 second while I share my screen here.
Take your time.
Okay. Everybody seeing that?
Yeah.
Yes, you are good.
Perfect. Okay. All right. Well, thank you for having me speak today. I just want to start a little bit, just kind of introduce myself. I know some of you probably know Wraith, Scarlett, and Randolph a lot already just because of the work we've done with California Cattlemen's. But for those who don't, just kind of wanted to, do a quick overview of who we are. And before we kind of get into some of the aspects of wildfire and how it can kind of affect your insurance coverage and kind of some areas of coverage that you should pay attention to and what the industry is doing right now. So we've been established in 1917 with the exclusive agent of the California Cattlemen's Association. We do a lot of property and casualty products, which would be property, liability, auto, work comp, that kind of stuff. And I know we also do a lot of the lack of rainfall policies in the Western region, the PRF lack of rainfall stuff. So I know we get those weather emails out to the members quite a bit. So that's probably where you've seen our name a lot coming from me or Jim Van, among others in our office. And this kind of gets a little bit about the stuff that the different policies that we do, kind of a full range of employee benefits, commercial lines, that kind of thing. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but if you have any questions once this is over and or any of these lines of business, feel free to reach out. So how I wanted to start today was talk a little bit about the industry perspective and kind of where we are right now. In insurance, we kind of talk a lot about hard and soft markets. Soft market is really when we're in an area where claims are really under control, carriers are doing well, really aggressive in writing business. And we have been in that for a while, but I don't think it's a shock to anybody right now, especially in the farming industry, the cattle industry, that we are definitely in a hard market in California now. And that is as a result of the wildfires driving up property claims like crazy, and also auto claims are up quite a bit in California as well. And so just kind of some numbers. I mean, an estimated 350,000 California homeowners couldn't get home insurance after the 2018 wildfire season. And now consider about 2 million California homes are in wildfire zones, and about 80% of those are underinsured and 60% are significantly underinsured. And so with that, I mean, we're in this place just because 11 of the last 20 most destructive wildfires in California have occurred in the last 4 years. And, insurance carriers are very good about looking at the very recent history to determine rates and what they want to write. They're kind of notorious for that, as opposed to looking at a real extended period of time. And so right now we're really in that hard market. And so where does that leave our agriculture clients that are in the more wildfire exposed areas? A lot of the other clients that are maybe, in the Sacramento Valley, things like that, you don't see as much of an effect that clients like you would see. I mean, we're seeing non-renewals go up like crazy, a 600% increase in complaints to the Department of Insurance in the last 10 years due to non-renewals happening, 270 rate increases filed since 2017. And a lot of the carriers are just pulling out of areas where they've normally written traditional farm packages, homeowners, renters policies, and it leaves you in a situation where, you know, the California Fair Plan, that is a very watered down coverage that covers for just a property policy, fire, and then you can buy back some other coverages now, but it's extremely expensive, a non-comprehensive plan that you're used to in, you know, a normal carrier that you've been with a lot. And so we're seeing clients who have had, you know, maybe, you know, whether it's a $10,000 a year premium for the auto, equipment, property liability, you know, with 4 different carriers, because certain carriers, oh, we don't want to do the auto in certain areas or the property. And so we end up with Fair Plan and really having to move those accounts around. And so that's really kind of the state of where we are now, which is, it's too bad. And we're really looking in ways to kind of get out of that. And we always have kind of seen these up and down cycles. And so hopefully we're kind of in the bottom now and we're kind of starting to, you know, do some out of the box thinking to get ourselves out of it and figure out a way to kind of control these claims and be able to have some of these carriers get back in the industry. So I like this slide. This is from the insurance commissioner, Ricardo Lara. It kind of talks a lot about underwriting in your areas, and I kind of like what it represents. Kind of the old school way is you look at the home, you zoom in, you see zone 1 there is right around the house, and they look, okay, and then zone 2 is, okay, how far out is the defensible space? I know the fire chief just discussed. And, you know, they really look at that and say, okay, what are the chances a fire is going to happen based on what we're seeing here? And they really look at the individual exposure. That is not happening anymore. The new school way on the right is basically Google Maps. You go down, you figure out where this location is, and you look at a fire score, and that's it. And they've said, okay, we're in this radius of this area. The upper management has said that this is a certain fire score area, and we're not going to do it. And there's just not enough individual underwriting going on anymore for a specific client. Now, we're hoping that that's changing. I mean, we are seeing some 2020 action plans by the Department of Insurance. They're going to try and start requiring greater transparency for these wildfire score risk models, require these models take into account, you know, community and individual mitigation, and which the current models do not do, and require these models to be open for public review, and allow homeowners to appeal their risk score if they believe it's based upon wrong information. And so it also gives, you know, clients a chance to address mitigation issues to lower their risk score. So these are the things that are being talked about. You know, I'd be surprised if all of them ended up really happening. And but, you know, there are certain things that hopefully will. And so where we need to get back to that old school model of individual risk assessment, where an agent like me can show photos and see what you've done, like the fire chief was saying, and then have that be the reason to write your account, not just a satellite view. So that's really, you know, and it's definitely frustrating for the agent, the client, that the individual aspects are not being looked at. So where do we go from here? You know, the main thing we have to do is the mitigation efforts, and whether that's on an individual level or what the just maintaining the forest management better. Hopefully we get out of some of these drought years we've been having, and the cost benefit analysis from the carriers will get them back into the market. And I think eventually we'll get there. And the best way to kind of make that happen is, you know, the building codes, fire resistant modifications, land use planning, community-wide abatement, defensible space, you know, enhanced infrastructure, wildfire sensors. All those kind of things are what's going to get these carriers back into the market. And unfortunately, it's just taking some time, I think, as to get there. And I mean, some of these wildfire mitigation efforts, you know, it's not going to happen overnight, but I think we will be there. And also some out of the box thinking from the carriers as well. I mean, I've got clients that said, look, can we do a $25,000 deductible, a $50,000 wildfire deductible, things like that, that the actuarials will be able to say, okay, if clients are willing to do a wildfire deductible, which we're seeing some of the non-mainstream carriers add onto their policies, it's relatively new, but not everybody's doing it yet, where I think the numbers can make sense, where a client would much rather have one carrier do everything with comprehensive coverage, even if that does mean taking on some of the risks themselves for this one area. You know, I mean, they would rather do that than have a fair plan policy that is really watered down. So hopefully those are the kind of things, a combination of those two things, some out of the box thinking, and maybe the clients and carriers working together. And as far as who's willing to take on what risk, and some of these mitigation efforts will start helping. So just to kind of talk a little bit, 2/3 of wildfire victims are underinsured by more than $100,000. And so the main thing that we need to do is, it's unbelievable how much people they set up their policy, they, get their limit, kind of get it to the cost they want or things like that. Or maybe the agent doesn't communicate to them well enough what it actually costs to rebuild a home. So the average cost to rebuild a home in California is about $130 to $200 a square foot. Now I always kind of caveat that is the average. I mean, if you have a nicer high-end home in certain parts of the state, whether maybe you border up to the Bay Area or the LA region, and if it's a nicer home with high-end, I mean, that could easily be, I've seen $300, $400, $500 a square foot easily. And so it's really important to kind of keep an eye on those figures, and just make sure you're adequately insured, because that's the biggest problem when these wildfires happen. You have a total loss. Nobody's been paying attention to that. And inflation happens and construction costs go up, which we're seeing now, and that's the problem. So, and also just thorough inventory checks of what you have in your home, household personal property. Just make sure, because carriers will throw on a percentage of your dwelling value for the household personal property limit. A lot of times that's perfectly fine. Sometimes it's not. And whether that, and also it's, fine arts, jewelry, those kind of things are always limited in the policy unless you specifically list your higher end items. And so a lot of people think some of this stuff is just automatically covered under your household personal property limit, but some of those specialty items, not necessarily the case. So it's just always important to kind of keep an eye on that and make sure that, know what's covered in that household personal property. Is it enough? And then make sure you've listed out specifically some of these other things that are limited in the policy to maybe a $5,000 or $10,000 limit. And so, you may have a $20,000 wedding ring, a $30,000 painting, things like that need to be specifically looked at. And those are the items that are forgotten about. So an extended replacement cost, I think this is really important in wildfire, and there's multiple ways to kind of address that part, but extended replacement cost is basically an automatic endorsement that's added to the policy that says, we will give you an additional amount automatically above and beyond the limit that you have on your home. And so say you've got, a lot of times it's 25%, and not all carriers do it, and the percentages vary, but a lot of times it's, 20, 25%, something like that. And it allows for that inflation when you're not expecting it. And the Paradise Fire is a great example of this. A lot of people had, say, a $200 limit per square foot on their home, thought it was plenty. But when supply and demand gets messed up as much as it did in that fire, the $200 a square foot isn't going to be enough, because that limit makes sense when it's just one claim, your home by itself got caught on fire and you need to rebuild it. But the problem is when you had your claim, but also 200 other people did as well, then there's not enough contractors to come in and rebuild all those homes, and they've got more work than they need. Construction materials are going up, and they're going to charge a lot more because they can. It's simple supply and demand. And so that was a huge problem in some of these bigger wildfires that take out a lot of people's property at one time. And this extended replacement cost can help that a little bit. Or you could just increase your building coverage to an amount that maybe you're more comfortable with in the event that, hey, maybe the normal replacement cost isn't going to be enough to help here. And I know it's a hard decision to make, because you are obviously paying premium for the higher limit that you have. So it's like, okay, do I want to pay that for those one-off claims, that the very rare chance that we're going to have an entire area burned down at one time, and construction materials and contractors are going to be in short supply? But it's definitely something that to pay attention to. And a lot of people in these areas where, like Paradise, like Napa, were very surprised about, because they said they couldn't believe what we're being charged to rebuild their homes. So I want to go over just a few areas of the property policy that we see, and just to kind of make sure, just point out a couple things real quick. Obviously, the main part is the dwelling coverage. This costs to rebuild and replace the physical structure of your home, the attached structures like a deck, attached garage, things like that, and covered up to the policy limits. Pretty standard. That also includes any fixtures, appliances, that kind of thing. So I always kind of like to say that the limit to use would be, whatever you wouldn't take with you if you were to move to a new home tomorrow, that kind of stuff. And the other structures coverage. These items are the items that are not attached to your house, such as a detached garage, shed, fence. This coverage is typically written as a percentage of your total dwelling limit. So usually 10%. So if it's a $250,000 dwelling, you'd have 25,000 of these other structures. I put this in because in your industry, there's one caveat to this coverage that I think has the potential to get people in trouble. Is if the other structures coverage is meant on a dwelling, is a throw in on the dwelling, where if it's used basically for your personal use, store some household goods, photos, things like that. It is not meant for a structure that's used for business activities. And there's a lot of gray area, obviously, in the farming industry, because let's face it, any other structure you have, you're going to have something in there that's going to be used for the ranch. Now, I don't see any carriers digging their feet in a whole lot if you've got a couple tools in there that are used, but don't rely on that other structures coverage to cover you for a building that you have on your property that maybe you store hay, you have cattle in there, you're parking tractors, big tractors, stuff like that. They could easily come back and say that other structures coverage is not going to apply because this is a building used for your business operation and not just kind of an ancillary building for your home, like a tough shed and things like that, that most, a homeowner in a non-farm area might have in their backyard. So there are a lot of clients who kind of just see that other structures coverage and say, oh yeah, I've got those 2 barns with that shed, that limits plenty. But the problem is, what are you using that shed for is the biggest thing. And I've seen claims denied because they store a bunch of hay in there. And there's no gray area as far as what that building's being used for. There's no personal aspect of it at all. This is all business, and you needed to specifically list that. So that's kind of anyway, I always kind of feel like that was something important to say, because it is kind of a caveat a lot of clients don't know, is that other structures, they think it's just kind of an all-encompassing thing on their property of anything under that limit they'd be covered. But it's not. Ordinance and law coverage, always also an important thing. Say you had a wildfire and there's a lot of new construction rules coming out. This covers you if you have an older ranch home, let's say, that was built in the 60s, and say 60% of it burns down. Then what happens when the city comes in and says, hey, too much of your building is burned down. We need you to rebuild the entire thing now to up to current building code standards, which could be new types of electrical, a new roof, sprinkler system, all those kind of things. And so the current insurance policy language says we will rebuild you to what you had before, period. No better, no worse, what you had before. So if you didn't have a sprinkler system before, without this endorsement, they're not going to add that. And so that is definitely something to just make sure that's on your policy, because there can be a lot of costs that come around when you have to rebuild a home that's older and you think, oh, it's only $130 a square foot. It's really simple. But what are you going to have to add into that home? And this coverage will pay to demolish the part of the building that wasn't damaged, debris removal, and all the increased cost of construction. So that's definitely important, just because you always think you're just going to build back to what you had, but will the city let you with their new regulations? And that's not always going to be the case. Loss of use, always important. The state of California kind of increased that up to 36 months. That allows you, if you have to get temporary housing while your home's being rebuilt wildfire. It was, some states do 12 months. The old law had 24 months. And if there's a big area that needs to be rebuilt, that's not always enough time to get contractors out there and everything. So 36 months, that was increased to allow for a loss of use coverage. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but it's definitely an important coverage to have to get that temporary space, to get back up and going. A lot more carriers now are offering fire protection, suppression things, and they will keep an eye on wildfires in the area. And so, I know a specific carrier, Travelers Insurance, I know, is dispatching teams when wildfires come in. They will look at all the addresses that they insure in the path of where they think a wildfire might be going, and they'll dispatch a team to do wildfire mitigation on those people's property to try and save those buildings. So certain carriers are, doing things like this a little bit now, more often, and doing it on the lower value properties. This type of thing was normally reserved for the very high end homes, the $10 million celebrity homes in Malibu, things like that. But it's becoming a little bit more now with other carriers getting involved and saying, it's when wildfires are coming in, can we go to all the properties we write and try and save them? And I know one of a lot of issues is they do offer a form to waive that, where they won't be allowed to come on your property. Because I know some ranchers don't want people just randomly coming in and cutting down brush, maybe a tree, things like that. So that's always kind of the caveat to that, is you also have to be willing to let people come on your property and do wildfire mitigation, which means cutting things down, which you may not like. And so it's not something that's forced on clients, and you can sign a waiver. But, from our experience, most clients are thinking they'd rather lose a tree on their property than their entire home. So they're allowing it to happen. So it's not become too mainstream yet, but it's just kind of an example of some out of the box thinking carriers are doing to try and save some of the properties that write in these areas. And they're definitely trying not to write too much in one single area just to avoid those huge claims at any one time. And so there's generally not as many properties in one area that they would have to do that for as before, because certain carriers that would write a huge amount of property in one specific geographical area. They're really paying more attention to that now, which is helping. So in the event that wildfire comes, not any one carrier is going to get killed maybe like they did before. I'm going to throw in a little bit about equipment coverage. It's easy to always forget that new piece of equipment and add it to the policy. They think it might be automatically covered. Just always make sure that those new pieces of equipment are turned into your agent to add. It's not always going to be included in that unscheduled limit if you have one. And always keep it on the actual cash value of the equipment. Make sure it's right. A lot of what we have, people add that on, just leave the value for 5 years and never change it. But that stuff depreciates, and it's like a car. Save some money by lowering those amounts, because it's only going to pay you what the current value of that equipment is. It's not going to replace it with a brand new one. So make sure that you update those depreciated values to save money every year, or just make sure you're not underinsured on those pieces of equipment that you have. That's something that always, every few years, all of a sudden clients will say, oh, I never really paid attention to these limits. I really should have done that. And they just didn't do it. And all of a sudden, you take 10, 20,000, off of the number of items, it brings down the money. It can save you a little bit. Okay. I wanted to throw in this last part. This doesn't really get into property at all, but this is kind of the pasture fire insurance available that is out there in California. So say, for example, my office does some of this. I don't do a lot of it, but it's definitely something that we can do. Other people in the office do a lot of. This covers you for fire protection on your actual pasture ground. So if you have 5,000 acres, the maximum maximum coverage per acre in California would be $20 an acre, cost of $250 per $100 of coverage. So for example, if you had 5,000 acres at $20 per acre coverage, that'd be $100,000 in protection if a wildfire came in and burned up your pasture ground. So that $100,000 in protection at a 2.5%, which would be the $202.50 per 100. For the premium, that'd be a $2,500 premium cost per year. So in the event fire occurs, that 3,000 acres of the 5,000, say a fire occurs and 3,000 acres of the 5,000 that are covered burn. The policy would issue an indemnity of $60,000 minus the deductible of 5 acres, $59,900 would be the indemnity issued to someone like you in this situation. So this is kind of an example of some coverage that's out there to make sure you're properly insured, not only on the property policy, but on the actual pasture ground as well. So again, I'm Kevin Hoppin. I've been with Wraith Scarlett Randolph since 2003, vice president owner there. I know a lot of you know Jim Van in our office, my business partner. He handles a lot more of the crop stuff. I handle a lot of the property and casualty. So I want to get through that a little quick, just so I know I kept everybody on time here, close at least. So that's all I've got. So I will turn it back over to Kirk if anybody has any questions.
Yeah, thank you for that presentation, Kevin. Again, if anyone does have any questions, this is the last time I'll tell you this. For either Kevin or any of our previous speakers, you can either type those in the chat box at the bottom of your Zoom window, raise your hand at the bottom of your Zoom window, or if you are joining us via phone, *9 will raise your hand and *6 will unmute you. So I'll give it a moment for anyone to raise their hand and ask questions. Katie, if you would notify me in the event anyone raises their hands. Again, want to thank all 4 of our speakers today. Great presentations. I appreciate it. For those of you who have joined us today, we will be sending out, as I mentioned earlier, a follow-up email either later today or early tomorrow that includes a recording of this workshop, as well as PowerPoints of the presentations you saw today, and a link to a quick 2-minute survey that if you could please fill out, I would greatly appreciate it. I don't see any questions yet. Katie, do we have any raised hands?
We do not.
All right, well, in that case, I will allow everyone to get on with their days. Thanks again to our speakers, and thank you all for joining us this morning.